So let me start with a general welcome to our webinar. We want to make sure that we're recognizing the Indigenous people whose land was forcibly colonized. So let me read an acknowledgement. The Randall Preserve, formerly Banning Ranch, and Greater Santa Ana River Coastal Corridor is part of the ancestral homeland and traditional territory of the Acjachemen and Tongva people. We pay respect to these Native nations, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the regional diaspora. This leads us to the title of today's presentation, which is the Acjachemen, First People of Orange County. In working to preserve and steward the natural world in the Santa Ana River Coastal Corridor, it's vital that we learn about all aspects of its natural and cultural history and current concerns. This then must include learning about the Native people who lived here, their practices, what happened when outside people came, and what concerns Native people have today. There are many online resources available to learn from, and we would encourage you to do some research of your own, but we will be posting some on YouTube. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Patricia Martz. She's an anthropologist specializing in the archaeology of Southern California and Professor Emerita from the Department of Anthropology, California State University, Los Angeles. She's the founder and president of the California Cultural Resources Preservation Alliance, and the Alliance is a nonprofit organization of archaeologists, concerned citizens, historians, and Native Americans. The mission is to protect and preserve the archaeological, cultural, and historic sites. She also served as the prehistoric archaeologist for the State Historic Resources Commission and is an adopted member of the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, Acjachemen Nation 84A. At this point, I would like to pass it over to Pat.
Thank you, Melanie. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge my co-author, Rebecca Robles, Acjachemen cultural bearer. We were supposed to give this talk together, but Rebecca's in Hawaii and she asked me if I would give it without her. And I suggest that as I give this presentation, you see if you can guess which is the voice of the Acjachemen descendant and which is the voice of the anthropologist. So the Acjachemen were named Juaneño after Mission San Juan Capistrano. But the Acjachemen is the tribal name that they call themselves. Whoops, wrong way. So I'd like to give a brief overview of the California Indians. The Channel Islands provide evidence for a prehistoric occupation of California 13,000 years ago. The Acjachemen creation story says that they have always been here. Maybe they are right. Researchers in San Diego County say that they have uncovered evidence that humans were in California as early as 130,000 years ago. The evidence consists of cut marks on a mastodon bone and possible stone artifacts. California had the densest pre-contact population north of Mexico. At the time of colonization, California Indian population was estimated to be 310,000. By the end of the 19th century, there were less than 20,000 indigenous people. Originally, the Acjachemen numbered more than 3,900. By 1834, the known Acjachemen population was down to 861 people. This drastic population loss has been attributed to the fact that the indigenous people of California had no resistance to the infectious diseases brought by the Spanish. These diseases, such as tuberculosis, smallpox, influenza, are caused by living in close contact with chickens, cattle, and pigs, and these animals were not present in the New World. Although the infectious disease reached epidemic proportions during the mission system, it is believed that these diseases were introduced as early as the 1500s by shipwrecked Spanish sailors. Linguistically, the California Indians were very complex. There were 6 language phyla and 21 language families. To put this in perspective, Europe only has 3 language phyla. Indo-European, Turco-Mongolic, and Basque. As a result, when the Spanish entered California, they found over 120 languages spoken, and 70% were as mutually unintelligible as English and Chinese. As they marched up the coast, they encountered a new language every 10 miles. Linguists assigned the Acjachemen language to the Takic language family of the Uto-Aztecan language stock. Except for the Colorado River tribes, agriculture was not practiced in California. Many California Indians, including the Acjachemen, traded with these river tribes and with the pre-contact agriculturalists of Arizona and knew about agriculture. But their economy was based on hunting and gathering and not focused on a single species like corn. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get this. Here we go. One explanation for this is that in California, almost all the rain falls in the winter. And corn agriculture requires spring, summer rain, or extensive irrigation. Irrigation would have required a lot of work because unlike the Nile and other fertile river valleys where agriculture was developed in the old world, the rivers here were unpredictable, and in their flood episodes and tended to change course from time to time. For example, the Santa Ana River in the past has had its outlet at Seal Beach and at Bolsa Chica in Huntington Beach. Today's flood episodes are controlled by concrete flood control channels. In California, hunting and gathering was more efficient. Acorn meal, known as wish, is rich in protein and fats and provided 25% of the diet. Instead of agriculture, the California Indians practiced a seasonal round of trading, feasting, and gift giving to maximize the seasonal availability of resources and even out shortages from one area to another, thereby creating a healthy balance. They also used controlled burning to burn away the understory from their oak trees and maximize the seasonal availability of resources. This would encourage the growth of grasses for the animals that they hunted and for the seeds that they collected. The Acjachemen have always been a coastal people. They were proficient mariners. Shellfish, fish, and sea mammals were an important dietary staple. Abalone fishhooks were used for line fishing. Other fish were speared by men diving in the kelp beds. Sea mammals were harpooned from small ocean craft. Archaeologists have documented a maritime village at the mouth of San Mateo Creek that provided marine resources for the main village of Panhe. Traditionally, the Acjachemen lived in the southern Orange County region of Southern California, with their core area lying in San Juan Capistrano and San Mateo valleys. Their lands extended north along the Pacific coast and south to Las Pulgas Creek between San Clemente and Oceanside. They lived eastward into the Santa Ana Mountains and just over the crest line into Temescal Creek and around Lake Elsinore. The Acjachemen believe that these boundaries suggested by anthropologists are not an accurate reflection of the territories that were shared by their Luceño neighbors to the south and Gabrielino neighbors to the north. Of all the 21 missions, the Acjachemen are the only tribe in California to have a description of their beliefs and customs written by a priest at a time when the people were still living in their traditional manner. The priest, Geronimo Boscana, served at Mission San Juan Capistrano from 1814 to 1826. His book, Chinishnish, was first published in 1846. Despite the attempts of the mission fathers to keep the Acjachemen from practicing their traditional beliefs and culture, much of it was passed on from generation to generation in songs and stories, which are still sung and told today. One of the most enduring oral traditions is the founding of Patiadum in San Juan Capistrano. According to Boscana, Oisin was the chief of a place called Siat. His people prospered there, but as the population grew, the land could not provide sufficient seeds and game for everyone. So with his oldest daughter, Coroni, and young families who were willing to join him, he set out in a southerly direction to find a good place for a new village. They found the beautiful San Juan Capistrano Valley and made camp next to a spring. Here his people built their houses and established the village. Satisfied that the new village would thrive, Chief Oisin returned to his country of Siat and left his daughter Coroni as chief. The village was called Padiram, which means navel sticking out, because Coroni had an outy navel. It was also said that the spring bubbled up like her navel. Thereafter, women leaders were called Coroni. Ceremonies included an annual mourning ceremony commemorating those who had died during the previous year, special commemorations on the anniversary of the death of a chief or a high-ranking leader, and boys and girls initiations. Initiation of youth into manhood involved tests of endurance and the ingestion of Jimson weed, where they were told to dream of animals to find their spirit helper. Training could last a week as they were taught the history and moral and spiritual traditions of the Acjachemen people and their roles as men. Girls' coming of age ceremony was a time for joy and happiness. The girls were placed in a warm pit lined with aromatic herbs, and they received instruction on proper female conduct by their elder female relatives. The Acjachemen occupied over 20 villages with populations ranging from 50 to 125 people. Of these, Panhe, situated along San Mateo Creek, was the largest with over 250 people. Each village was occupied by a different lineage, and each was politically autonomous, but all were connected through a common language, clans, marriage network, and ceremonial exchange system. Each village had its own chief and a council of lineage leaders, ceremonial specialists, and shamans that decided on community matters and advised the chief. The chief was the ceremonial leader of the tribe, a political leader, and an economic administrator. He was assisted by several other men with important roles, such as the messenger who kept order at ceremonies, another man who led the communal rabbit hunt, and another who maintained the ritual calendar by observing the sun and the moon. Hunters were expected to share their game with the community before eating of it themselves. Chiefs collected surplus from the community to be used in fiestas and to be redistributed during times of need. Pictographs, rock paintings, and petroglyphs, rock carvings, may be found throughout Chumash territory. The rock paintings are characterized by geometric forms and sometimes human or geomorphic figures. Colors are mostly red, but sometimes white, black, and yellow were used. Pictographs were made during boys and girls initiation ceremonies and by ritual specialists seeking to acquire power. The predominant petroglyphs are cupules. These are small rounded scoops in a boulder. The famous bell rock with cupules can be seen in the Bowers Museum courtyard. A large carved maize boulder was found in the middle of San Juan Creek Valley. Body painting was used by both men and women in ceremonies. Facial and upper body tattoos were a personal adornment for women. Feathers of woodpecker, hawk, eagle, and owl were used both symbolically and decoratively in many rituals and ceremonies. Basket weaving was a major form of artistic expression for women and demonstrated both the fineness of stitching and the color and pattern of decorative elements. Baskets were made and used for a variety of functions, such as serving trays and bowls for serving food and storing objects, loose woven flat trays for sifting, large baskets for storing grains, and baskets so tightly woven that they could hold water and were used for stone bowling. Baskets were given as gifts, used for gathering, and as women's hats. The largest of all were the granaries woven out of willow, mule fat, or artemisia branches and used to store acorns. Physical sports such as foot races were played. The game shinny, where teams with clubs would knock the ball across the other team's goal, were enjoyed by both men and women. Gambling games were extremely popular. The peon hand game, which requires extraordinary mental concentration, starts at dusk and is played into the night by Acjachemen's descendants today. In the past, peon was played by men only. Women teams have been established in recent times. Today's songs and dances are for entertainment and ceremonies, and most songs had a spiritual aspect. Songs served as a means of passing down knowledge and oral traditions. The creation story and clan origins were preserved in songs sung at ceremonies. Some song cycles could take several nights to perform. Today's songs are performed at ceremonies and special events, and specially trained Acjachemen singers are called to perform at wakes and funerals that last all night. A perfect storm. The mission period was between 1769 and 1821 and was the end of Acjachemen villages and traditions. The first mission in Acjachemen lands was established in 1776. The Acjachemen were forced to leave their villages and ways of life. In addition to infectious diseases, they suffered cultural shock and population decimation from the change in foods, type of work, crowded living quarters, and loss of freedom. They were forbidden to practice their religion or traditional culture and were punished for breaking the rules. Padre Antonio de las Concepcion Ora of Mission San Miguel enraged his contemporaries by a report to the Viceroy of Mexico that the Franciscan order was guilty of cruelty to the Indians. He was declared insane and removed from California. The response to cultural shock and mistreatment was loss of cultural identity, low birth rate, sickness, sporadic resistance, and one unsuccessful revolt. Despite this difficult history, many Acjachemen descendants are Catholic, and this is not meant to offend them. The Mexican Rancho Period began with the Mexican Revolution from Spain. Under the Mexican government, the Acjachemen were turned out of the missions, and with a few exceptions, lands promised to them were given to Mexican petitioners. Many Acjachemen men worked as vaqueros on the ranches, while the women sometimes worked at the haciendas cleaning and cooking. In 1833, the small San Juan Capistrano mission community was formed as a Pueblo Libre, one of only 4 in California. Here, the remaining Acjachemen families could farm small plots of land as independent people, but under a Mexican administrator. By 1841, less than 100 Acjachemen remained in town, and the Pueblo was disbanded. The Acjachemen families chose which small plots of land they wanted, and the remaining lands were open to settlers. In a few years, most of the Acjachemen lost these lands as well. The American period began in 1848. These were chaotic times. The Spanish and Mexicans were mainly confined to the coastal areas. Now settlers, gold miners, and loggers invaded the mountains and the interior valleys. They silted the streams, cleared forests, drained marshes, and fenced the land. Wild game and plants needed by the Indians were destroyed or fenced off for cattle. In addition to starvation, the Indians were subjected to hatred and violence. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. The state and federal governments reimbursed citizen militia for their ammunition, guns, and horses to track down and kill Indians. Labor laws were passed where an Indian could be declared a vagrant and put in jail. His labor was then auctioned to townspeople, and he worked without pay to remedy his fine. Indian women and children were often exploited. Later, Indian children were sent to Indian boarding schools where they were separated from their parents and their communities, wore uniforms, and their appearance was altered to look more like Americans. They were not allowed to speak their native language and were sent to work as servants as a vocational training program. Many Acjachemen descendants went to Sherman Indian School in Riverside. Acjachemen ancestors suffered from negative images. They were considered to be technologically inferior and docile and passive and helpless in the face of European domination. This is due to the religious fanatism of 16th century Spain and the worldview at the time of European contact that Western civilization represented the pinnacle of cultural evolution. The 16th through 20th centuries are characterized by the drive to conquer, colonize, and exploit. And the measure of a people was according to technological achievement, wealth, and aggression. As a child growing up in California, I learned that the California Indians lived in grass houses, didn't wear many clothes, and were peaceful and timid, and dug up bulbs and roots from the ground with sticks. The Gold Rush immigrants called all California Indians Digger Indians. This was not an expression of admiration. The connotation was that they were backward and primitive and knew no better than to dig up roots and bulbs for a living. They were not like the Indians of the Great Plains who attacked the pioneers as they immigrated to California. The man in the war bonnet is Chief Clarence Lobo. he found it necessary to wear this Plains Indian regalia when he met with Washington, D.C. officials to pursue land claims for the Acjachemen people. Otherwise, they would not recognize him as a Native American. The children in the photos grew up on Rancho Santa Margarita, now Camp Pendleton, where their dad, Jose Oliveras, was the foreman. The couple on the bottom right shows Jose and Viviana Oliveras in 1972 at their 50th wedding anniversary. The Acjachemen today are business people, doctors, nurses, lawyers, educators, construction workers, and so on. Many are also proud of and practice their Native heritage. During the turbulent times of the past, a series of Acjachemen leaders helped the community to persevere. Since then, a variety of leaders have taken political, social, and educational roles for the betterment of the Acjachemen tribe to renew knowledge of language, traditional culture, and the preservation of pre-contact archaeological sites. Panhe is the place of the ancestors. It's situated in Camp Pendleton at the mouth of San Mateo Creek. At the time of European contact in the late 1700s, Panhe was the largest and most populous of the Acjachemen towns, with a vast social network that reached the length and breadth of the tribe's territory. Approximately half of the current Acjachemen descendants can trace themselves directly to a Panhe ancestor who is listed in the San Juan Capistrano Mission baptismal records. In 1981, the archaeological site complex representing the Panhe village was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the San Mateo Archaeological District. The Acjachemen consider it to be a traditional cultural property and a sacred site. Although the people were forced to abandon Panhe during mission times, and with the secularization of the mission, it became a part of Rancho Santa Margarita. And then Camp Pendleton, it was never forgotten. There are stories of sweat lodges and ceremonies during the 1930s, visitations for prayers and meditations in the 1940s, ghost dances and reburial ceremonies during the 1980s. In 1889 and 1990, there was the reburial of important ancestors. The ashes of two Acjachemen tribal members and a natal cord were buried there in recent times. The Acjachemen continued to feel the connection to Panhe. This Native American spring gathering and celebration of protection and preservation is open to the public and has been held at Panhe every March since 2008. The losses continue. It's estimated that 90% of Acjachemen ancestor sites have been destroyed to make way for development. The sacred site of Panhe was threatened by the proposed Foothill South Toll Road. This was successfully stopped by the San Onofre Coalition, which included the Acjachemen organized United Coalition to Protect Panhe. Currently, a portion of the Panhe village complex is threatened by Camp Pendleton Sierra Trainings Program use of the site as an assembly area for heavy tracked vehicles. Archaeological data indicate that this portion of the Panhe village complex was occupied by a clan with a maritime orientation. They were expert mariners who fished, hunted sea mammals, and traveled to the Channel Islands in balsa canoes for trade. Patiedum is located in San Juan Capistrano. The elder in the photo is Luis Robles. The prayer ribbons on the fence contain offerings of tobacco. In spite of the efforts of the Acjachemen tribal members, California Cultural Resource Preservation Alliance, and Sierra Club Sacred Sites Task Force, the site has been almost completely destroyed by the construction of sports facilities, including a gym, swimming pool, and playing fields for a private Catholic high school, which ironically is named after Father Junipero Serra, the priest who established the missions that led to the destruction of the California Indians. The Patiedum village complex was not confined to that area. Portions of the extended village have been discovered across the road in the San Juan Capistrano Northwest open space. In 2014, the San Juan Capistrano City Council met to discuss developing the open space with playground equipment and athletic fields. The Acjachemen and the California Cultural Resource Preservation Alliance protested and requested that the city make it a cultural park, honoring the Native Americans who built the mission and the historic portions of the city. It took 14 years and many delays, but in 2022, the Patiedum Interpretive Park was finally constructed. So why is it important to learn about the California Indians? What happened to the California Indians is an allegory for inhuman treatment of fellow humans. There's a lesson to be learned about our shared California history. Hopefully, this has brought a deeper understanding, not only of Native Americans, but of all humanity. The California Indians were not primitive or backward. They were misunderstood for their relationship to nature and their belief systems. It's important to learn about the California Indians for the 7 generations in the future. The California Indians were the earliest people to live in California and thrived here for thousands of years. They adapted to many of the environmental changes that we're facing today, such as drought, climate change, and sea level rise. For example, tree ring data indicate that there was a drought in California that lasted 150 years, from AD 1100 to 1250. The Acjachemen worldview is that humans are a part of nature rather than apart from nature. Earth is the mother, giver of life. Some animals are superior to humans. All animals and many inanimate features and objects have spirits. And as humans trying to make a living, the ancestors responded to the opportunities and constraints presented by the diverse environment of California with ingenuity, a sense of humor, and love. So what can you do to help? work together with the Acjachemen community and cultural and environmental organizations to protect the environment and the sacred sites of the ancestors. Reject old stereotypes about Native Americans. And join the California Resources Preservation Alliance, a grassroots organization of Native Americans, archaeologists, historians, environmentalists, and interested people. They're interesting too. Working together to preserve archaeological sites and other cultural resources. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I appreciate the in-depth information that you provided. I'm gonna do things a little bit differently than we normally do and go ahead and finish the slides, and then it'll just be the two of us on the screen, and that'll give an opportunity for folks to add any additional questions into the Q&A box. So at this point, I just want to make sure that everyone on this Zoom or listening to the recording in the future knows that the Banning Ranch Conservancy has opportunities to engage both with the land and waters of the coastal corridor. Our geography is expanding from simply preserving and protecting one location to a broader area that we're calling the coastal corridor. And so it extends up and down the coast, from the ocean up the river to about Adams, and includes the 1,000-acre network of preserved lands and waters, which includes the Huntington Beach wetlands, the Army Corps wetlands, the Randall Preserve, Fairview Park, and the regional park in between. So our geography is bigger, but we have opportunities to engage specifically at Fairview Park on the third Saturday of the month. And then we also do a cleanup at the Santa Ana River mouth along the beach at the mouth of the river, which was integral to the Native Nations here in Orange County. So that's the fourth Saturday of the month. And if you take out your phone and scan the QR code, you can get more information on those events. Of course, we encourage you to subscribe to our e-newsletter, which we send out just once a month because we don't believe in overwhelming people with information. And information will be posted in the chat in just a moment on getting involved here. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen. And that'll give us a chance, Pat, to have some interaction between us and the audience through the Q&A. So first question that is coming in from Armando has to do with something you spoke about very early in your presentation. So I'm appreciating Armando's patience in this question getting asked so late. Can you explain a little bit more about what is phyla? So this was related to the language that you were bringing up.
Well, phyla is like the main language. It's like if you're looking at how classifications of things. So phylum is the upper part. It's the most, it's the highest thing of the languages. And then under that are the various language families. And then it goes down to even, further than that. So it's a classification system.
Great, thank you. I also have a question here from Steve. What language did the Acjachemen speak?
That was the Takic language of Uto-Aztecan language language family.
And a follow-up is, do people still speak that language, and what do we know about it?
Yes, they're learning to speak it. They weren't allowed to speak it for a long time, so generations got lost. But there were wax, cylinders that were like an old-fashioned kind of record player, and some of the anthropologists had native speakers speak into these, and so they were held at the Smithsonian. So the Acjachemen and Gabrielino and other tribes have been given access to these, and so they're having to recreate their language because a few of the elders were able to pass down through some of the stories and songs, but they're learning the language again because of the, erasure.
And can you speak to that a little bit in terms of cultural erasure? I know that it's one of the priorities of the Newsom administration to make sure that tribes are brought to the forefront of land discussions, whether it's restoration or acquisition. There are a lot of ways that we can combat cultural erasure, and you gave a couple of examples, but what are some really tangible things that people could do today that combat cultural erasure?
That's a hard one. One of the things you can do is what you're doing is having events that educate people, because I talk to people and they go, oh, there's Indians still around. They don't even understand that there's these tribal, the Acjachemen and the Gabrielino. There's a number of tribes that are functioning, and people are practicing their traditional ways. So I think it's important, to educate people, to let them know. And as far as what they can do is be supportive. If there's legislation to be passed, I'm reading about giving land back, repatriations to African Americans, and I think that's wonderful. But I wonder, what about the first people that were here? And I'm seeing some evidence of some land backs. I had the privilege of visiting a 12-acre site in East LA, and it's dedicated to Vera Rocha, who was the chairperson of the Gabrielino Shoshone tribe. And so they've got 12 acres. They're planting native plants. They have school kids come and learn about the plants and things. So more things like that need to happen, and we need the broader community to support when these things come up. So the coastal Indians lost all their land. It was too valuable. And the federal government has been delinquent in not recognizing these tribes, because then they would have to give them some land somewhere. And so anything, if these things come up, join in supporting the Acjachemen, the Gabrielino, these coastal tribes. There were 21 what you call them, losing my train. There were 21 treaties that were broken, that were given to the Acjachemen people. So, there's a lot of problems there. So anytime people can educate themselves more and help in any way they can. And I think Banning Ranch is doing a wonderful job, because you're inviting and working closely with the Acjachemen and the Gabrielino on that land, and also at Fairview Park. So I think that's a big step.
I appreciate that. I do want to make sure, in terms of education, you mentioned the word repatriation. Can you explain the difference between that and rematriation?
And what?
Matriation? We've heard both used.
Well, repatriation is to try to give back or amend what has happened in the past by giving land back or money or to make up for the erasures and injustices of the past. What is the other one? Explain that one to me.
Well, I've heard that it has different connotations to different tribal entities. And so I thought I'd ask you to see if you had an understanding of the difference in the two. So if you don't, that's fine. Let me get to another question that came up. What are the sources of photos? And I'm guessing this was from your presentation. It seems like random photos were put together to display the tribe. However, can you confirm if they are accurate to tribes that were present today? People, baskets, dressings, etc. The presentation photos were kind of generalized. What can you tell us about the photos?
Well, these are things that Rebecca and I put together, and we did the best we could because there really aren't, we can't go back in the past and show the way things really did. But these were just what she and I tried to put out so that it would illustrate what we were saying.
Great, I appreciate that. I do want to bring to light another opportunity for involvement in terms of local activism. In Irvine, there's the Indigenous Museum that's being worked on. Can you give us a little context for that? And what should we know? How can we participate?
Sure. We're trying to get a museum of Indigenous and natural history. And we're looking at the Great Park as a site for it because of its accessibility. There's a train station there and the visibility. It's going to cost $100 million. And so we need some billionaires to want to help put that together. The city of Irvine says that they will consider it for their second development plan. They're working on the first one now. And what we want to do is have a museum that is mainly run by Indigenous people. The Audrey Museum does a real good job of this. And have offices and facilities for them as well as for the exhibits. And of course, they would be planning the exhibits as well so that they would be culturally appropriate. So we've had people sign petitions whenever we have a table at one of the events, some like the Heritage Park, from people to dinosaurs, or from dinosaurs to people, and some of the other similar events, the event at Pond Hay. And we've used those to our advantage, and the coalition, if anyone wants to join that coalition, I'd be happy to share my email so that they can join. We really need people to work with us. And it's the president of that is Mel Shantz. And we had a meeting with Katrina Foley of the Orange County Board of Supervisors, and seems like she's going to support us in that. And so, we've been working. This has gone on for years and years because Orange County is the only populous county of its size in California that lacks a natural history museum. And people have to take their kids to LA or San Diego. And there's a warehouse full of artifacts, thousands of artifacts, and millions of fossils that were excavated under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And they were supposed to be excavated for the benefit and inspiration of the people. But they're in a warehouse that doesn't have the facilities to exhibit or have the public come and see them. So that's another reason, important reason, why we want a museum, that so people can see these things that were excavated so they could enjoy them.
Excellent, thanks. And there are a couple questions specific to Banning Ranch, and I'm guessing you're talking about the conservancy rather than the property. What practices is Banning Ranch currently taking to change colonial environmental practices, and how are they currently supporting Acjachemen people? Great question. We are trying to engage directly with the various tribes that have representation locally. Both the board president, Terry Welsh, and I have been having meetings as frequently as we can squeeze them into the calendar. But the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, MRCA, who's the title holder for this particular property, the Randall Preserve, is working to create a tribal access and engagement plan. And so that question is probably better directed to them rather than to us, because we don't own or manage the land. So if folks are interested, you can get information on our website about MRCA and who to contact there. I'm aware of the time, so I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank Pat and Mercedes for participating, and Paul for putting this on. He had a last-minute emergency pop up, so appreciate everyone's work this evening. And in about a week, we will have this presentation loaded in English and Spanish on our YouTube channel, and you can access that on our website, banningranchconservancy.org. So thank you, Pat. We'll see you in the field, I'm sure. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Mm-hmm.